On today's episode we have Phoebe Snyder, and we talk about her journey with bees. And then for the Beyond the Buzz, we talk about hygienic bees. I think it's great conversation. I think you'll enjoy. So to start out, what's your name?
Phoebe Snyder.
Our second question, what's your apiary's name?
Phoebe's Bees
And where are you located?
in Greensboro, North Carolina.
And what year did you start with bees?
It was around, I'd say 2015. So it's about 10 years ago now.
Oh, very good. And how many colonies do you manage?
Currently, I'm around 30, but this coming year probably will get up to around 50 or 60.
Oh, very good. Welcome to Apiary Chronicles, where we dive deep into the world of beekeeping and the people who make it all happen. I'm Cal Hardage, your host and fellow bee enthusiast. So that begs the question, why bees?
That's a good question. It kind of goes back to how I grew up. I grew up on a farm, a small farm, about 5 acres in Western Maryland. And we had sheep and goats and donkeys, everything but bees. We had pretty much hedgehogs too. And so I think, there were a few other career ideas I had before settling on bees. I was going to be a professional violinist and a surgeon and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
But I realized that, I really liked working outdoors. And what kind of solidified that for me was early on in college. My mom is quite the entrepreneur. She has her own sewing business, but on the side, she has an eBay business. And one of the things, as unethical as I feel like this is now, we started hunting for and selling praying mantis egg sacs on eBay. So it was kind of that. It was just so entertaining, to on a Sunday, we would be we hunt for them in the winter. So getting our shears or our pruners and, a pillowcase, and we would go and, as we had started to do it more and more, we figured out kind of where they were. And, so it just kind of became really interesting to learn an insect like that. And I don't know. So then it just kind of naturally brought me to bees, with there being, beekeeping. Not many people would think of it, but beekeeping is really an entire industry and contributes so much to other areas of agriculture. So, behavior was really the majority of my interest, and bees are the busiest of all. So there's a lot to learn with them behavior wise.
Phoebe, I think it's really interesting you mentioned praying mantis. I remember being in high school and I was convincing my brother, praying mantis are the pets of the future.
Mm-hmm.
People could have them in their room. They'd have to, I didn't know anything beyond, oh, they'd be so cool. But I remember telling my brother about praying mantis that we've got to figure this out.
See, we were on the same wavelength there. But yeah, people had bought them. We would sell the egg case, and each one has like up to 500 praying
Oh,
mantids.
yeah.
And people would buy them by the hundreds. And I, as unethical as it was, I felt like we harvested in a sustainable. We would only take every other egg sac we found.
Oh, yeah. So you got started with bees in about 2015.
Correct. Yep.
What brought you to that point that you said, "Okay, let's get some bees"?
So that's kind of the oxymoron part of it. I only just got my own bees 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So I've kept bees in research settings and through like consultative kind of services. So when I first got started then in 2015, there was a mentor. She was working as a chemistry adjunct professor at the school I went to, but she so she did that part time, but then, she worked as a researcher at the USDA. And so she kind of started me at the ground level. I was
Oh,
cleaning
yeah.
equipment and working bees. And, so I guess because I had the science side, so I kind of leveled up into helping her on different research trips and taking data. And it just kind of went from there. And then that eventually, after I graduated college, I worked for her as an intern at the USDA before starting my master's. It is kind of funny to think that, I've been keeping other people's bees all these years, and it was good. It was good practice before I really
Oh,
got my own.
yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend. I mean, that is probably the more extreme of, test drive the car before you buy it. But I was already, the first hive I went into with Jody, my mentor, I knew I would be doing this as a career. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I was like, oh yeah, this is it.
Oh, yeah.
So here we are.
Did you so your undergrad or your bachelor's degree is in biology?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. And then what'd you go back to school for your master's?
That was biology as well. And
Oh,
my
okay.
thesis was focused on looking out at how performance of hygienic behavior, it's the important social immune behavior of the colony, how that performance of that behavior changes from one bee all the way up to a full colony scale. So I and compared different group sizes across the scale, and did part of that work in Israel and just published the findings of that last year.
Oh, very
Um,
good.
so that was fun.
Yeah, so I think you said your mentor, Jody?
Yes, yes, she was
Yeah.
my first mentor.
So at that point, before you got into bees, you said you got in that hive, you knew you'd be working with it. But what was the thought pattern before you ever started right there? Were you already leaning towards bees and thinking, "Yeah, this is interesting," and why? Does that go back to the insects with praying mantis and just kinda followed that path, or how did you end up there at bees?
Yeah, I think well, I was already obsessed with bees before, like,
Oh.
getting the to actually go, and she took me in the hive for the first time. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I've been ready for this." So
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was ready to have a life-changing experience, I guess. But before that, I had done, all the reading I could, and I actually saw one of the more sort of transformational things that I saw that I had watched a TED Talk from Marla Spivak, and she is a pioneer in our field, and generally in bees, but more specifically for the behavior I ended up studying. So the way she delivered that talk, and it just kind of opened, my world to this is so interesting, this insect and all the behaviors that I don't even know about yet. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
just kind of dug in, and it was it was on up from there.
With your research and having or looking into it, you knew a lot before you got into that first hive. But you got into that first hive. Was there anything that surprised you while you stood there doing that?
I think I was surprised. I mean, I'm a more, I guess that if that's evidenced by how much research I put into it before actually going into it. But I didn't expect to have the emotional connection that I
Oh,
felt
yes.
in the first hive. So when I think one of the craziest kind of cosmic event part of it was seeing a bee emerge for the first time, and
Oh, yes.
I don't know, it was just something about watching it emerge and crawl out, and it goes to work. And I don't know. So it was the hum of the hive. And it just, I think beekeeping kind of, once I actually got into the hives, came in my life at a really important time that I needed emotionally and personally. That, it became a way of intellectual exploration, but also personal development too. So it really felt right for me to be making a career of it, and just because I loved it.
Oh, yes. Th that feeling when you're in the hive, it's just crazy how people experience that. I know when I'm in my hives, it it totally because you're surrounded by bees and you're immersed in it. You totally forget about everything else, and that's if
Yeah.
you think about the best experiences or best moments in your life, that's the way they are. Everything else ceases to exist, and you're just
Yeah.
there.
Yep. Yeah, that's the part too. You can't help but be, locked in like that. I
Oh,
love that.
yeah. Did you get your first sting on that first day?
They kind of came all at once.
Oh, yeah.
I may have, it was on one of those first times I was installing a package and it was brutal. I probably got 50, 60, I don't
Oh,
know, something
yes.
crazy on my legs. And my mentor, there were a couple times, those first few times getting in the hives where I had heat stroke. Yeah, I got stung all those times. We went and worked in Africanized bees, and my
Oh,
one
yes.
friend, he got stung like 150 times. And she sat me down one time and said, Phoebe, I don't know if you're just getting baptized in fire or if maybe you need to think of another career path.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I just cried the whole way driving back from her house because I was like, "No, this has to work.
This
They can't
yeah.
reject me." So I stuck with it.
Yeah, well, very good, yeah. And then it took you a number of years before you got your first hive. When you got your first hive, what did you decide to get and how did you get started? I mean, did you go by Langstroth? You go with deeps, tins? Did you order a package? Did you get nukes? Did you catch a swarm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was picking up packages for our research hives, and he said that this was, let me see, when was this? I think in 2021 when I got these. And he said that he got more packages than, people had ordered, and he'd give me a deal on these other two. And, at this point, I had just moved to my new place and I had some backyard access. So I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to get, and I started with 8 frame equipment, even though I switched all the way over to 10 now, but it was just kinda like, this is the moment, this is when it can happen,
Oh, yeah.
and so I took 2 packages and started them in my backyard, and there is an HOA here, which I ended up paying for that decision later, and then crazily enough, my house got shot out, and the bullet, like, went straight in between my 2 hives, and then I later had to move them. But it was actually, I'm really glad, not glad that my house got shot up, but I'm glad that that experience happened because, with having to move them because it jump started the business. The way I was doing or going to do it, had I been able to keep them in the backyard was, okay, these are my 2 hives just for me. And, but then once I could no longer keep them in a place where it was more convenient, then I was like, okay, I need to, if I'm going to move them here to this property, how can I, you know, make this a revenue generating model? And I grew the hives, and Beekeeper really helped me out with providing those nukes. And, I work for him sometimes too. And so it just really, kind of built up quick, all because I had to move them.
Oh, it
So
caused a little bit of a mind shift there because of the
it did.
location.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a great point, when they're in the backyard and you just can run out there and they're just kinda part of the backyard. But if
Yep.
they're somewhere else, then it takes time and effort to get there. You start realizing, well, what's actually the cost of doing this?
Right. Yeah. And then, it justifies being more efficient and investing
Mhm.
in certain things to help you do those jobs easier. And then, well, now I need some more hives. And okay, what products can I make or what services can I offer? And, so now a few years later, it's kind of taking over, what my main job is. And now my plan this year is to invest more in that business and kind of grow out more of the consultative services part
Oh, yeah.
in Queens and stuff like that. But we'll see. We're not there yet.
It'll be exciting to see where you go with that. One thing you mentioned there, you started with 8 frames. Why did you go with 8 frames?
I think that was, he had the equipment ready and painted,
Oh, that's
and
what
so
yeah,
it was a convenience thing.
yeah,
And yeah, I've always preferred. I mean, I do like that you get a little bit more room with the 8. With frames, and if you feed frame feeders, I feel like you get a little bit extra room there. But yeah, my 10 is, for me, it's just easier if it's all the same
right.
equipment. And
So do you run deep tins, and then do you use any honey supers, or are you using all deeps?
my friend does all deeps, and I don't think I have the back for it.
Right,
um,
yeah,
yeah, so usually run double deeps for my brood chamber, but I think I'll explore some single deep brood management this year, and then I'll do medium supers.
oh, medium supers, yeah.
Yep.
with your hives, I think you mentioned 21 was about then. So when did you get your first honey harvest?
Let's see, I think that was 22 then. Yeah, hard to believe we're in 2025.
It is.
Um,
I
yeah, so
agree.
it wasn't, as I'm sitting here looking at the date. So I think, yeah, it was 22 was my first, and that was very small harvest that year. And then 2023, I expanded quite a bit. And then this past year was a big year too.
Did you find a did you have enough honey to start selling honey at that time?
Yeah, and so kind of my strategy at that time, because beekeeping, or at least that business, was not my full time job. I actually,
Right.
at that time, had a startup with another bee scientist, and we were in the process of launching a new product for beekeepers. So that was kind of my main focus. And then, even though I was beekeeping there too, that, for my own hives, and kind of developing that more as a honey brand, or like a boutique, not boutique really. I don't know. I have kind of different styles with my marketing. I have kind of a death metal kind of marketing with the honey, and then, kind of another. But so this was just kind of a different expression. And yeah, I can't remember what the question was, or why I was talking about that before. But
What path to selling honey and how that went for you?
oh, okay, that's right. Yeah. So my first year, Uh, I did have enough to sell. I sold at just a few markets, and just here and there where they popped up, and I made all my labels by hand, and that was a lot.
Oh,
But
yeah.
stamping and writing everything, and that did pretty good. I think, as anyone knows who does markets, you kind of never know what you're going to get, and it is a lot of work to stay dedicated to it. But you can build up, a reliable customer base from there. So I know what I was saying now, with having to balance my honey sales with, what my full-time job was. I was kind of looking for more ways to sell the honey at wholesale or bulk pricing, just so I didn't have to allocate so much time into bottling and
Oh,
retail.
yes.
And so that was effective those first couple years. And, now that I'm looking to establish it more as a brand, I'm going to change how I allocate my honey sales this year, if that makes sense.
Are you selling any other products beyond honey?
This year, yeah, I've done some beeswax stuff, just lip balms and the lotion bars I like. Um, one kind of big part of my revenue model is I keep the bees, some of my bees, at a winery, and he takes that honey and makes mead with it.
Oh, yes.
Um, so this past year was his first large scale mead production. And then I kind of do uh, hive tour, hive tours that I'll do, and some consulting stuff. And, this year I think I'll do, I spent all this time learning about selective breeding and queen rearing, but that's something I have yet to take on myself. But so that's kind of where I'm going this year, of establishing some good genetics in my apiary, and getting my getting my mating and queen rearing
Oh,
next.
yeah. Yeah, making mead, I've talked to someone that if I expand my apiary where I can have enough honey, they're gonna make some meads, which sounds really
Nice.
exciting to me to venture in there just on a hobby scale and try it and see how it goes.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm curious to try it on my own, but I'm also in a mead group on Facebook, and I see all kinds of stuff happening that, I'm not sure I would know what to do with it. So if somebody else can make it, and,
Make it, yes.
I get a little bit of it, then that's good.
Yeah, that works out, and then you don't have all the risk and all the equipment and everything to do it.
Yeah. Cause like we were talking about earlier, I know I would go out, and I've been trying to make myself not buy the mead making kits and all that,
Oh,
because it
yeah.
looks so easy and so much fun.
Oh,
But
I
we'll
fully
see.
get that, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump back just a little bit to your bees, and you really expanded them. How did you expand your apiary? You mentioned you hadn't really done queen rearing yet. You're gonna do more of that. Did you bring in packages? Did you do split? How'd you do the expansion?
Yeah, so when I really expanded, then I think that was 2020. 23, I believe. And a beekeeper that I had worked for, a couple years before that, he's grown his outfit quite a bit. And he said that, when I was going to get ready to go full time with my bees, that he would give me 20 newts that I could get started with.
Oh, yes.
And so that was a great boost. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it weren't for him, supplying those. So that got me started in that 23. And then I had great overwintering that year and they came out really strong. So
Oh, yes.
split a bunch and yeah, so kind of my pinch point now is um I have equipment all around me and trying to like build everything, my backyard. So it's just, I don't have a very good setup right now and being able to try and build my equipment here on time. So I just had some operational issues this last year with trying to work out of my house and scale it.
Oh,
And
yes.
so I had to clean up a lot of my own swarms. And that was more so than any of the, 8 years of beekeeping before that. And it's just because it was funny to feel like I was having like, uh, beginner growing pains, even
Oh,
though
yes.
it was very strange of, okay, I've been doing this, I know what I'm doing, but I had a very different set of challenges working out of here than before. So, this year, yeah, we're going to split even more. This year, I have a lot of equipment ready, some new yards and contracts that I'm working with to place the bees. So it should be a big year of expansion.
You mentioned you're gonna try and raise some queens. You mentioned splits. What's your plan of action to do that this year?
Yeah, that's I'm still working on. Well, I know what I know that I'll get kind of too off in the weeds about it. Yeah, I'm gonna split what I have coming out of winter, and then I have some of the new access yards. I can make my splits, and I have to kind of set up a teaching yard because I also teach
Oh, yeah.
beekeeping at a local college. So my plan is to split as many as I can and take some there for the teaching, and then bring them back to the other yards that I'll have set up as my mating yards. So we'll see. I'm about to check the bees here probably tomorrow and start figuring on how many splits and I can make and start planning from there. But yeah,
This weekend coming up, of course, this will be released next week, so but this weekend, it's like 70 degrees here on Saturday and Sunday.
yeah,
So
yeah, and this is the pitfall time of a lot of people here in the South or new beekeepers think, oh, good, we're out of winter and we can start. And that's kind of where the danger comes in is the
oh,
bees
yeah.
start brooding up and Uh, yeah, they can go through food real quick and starve, especially once the cold comes back in again. So, now's the time to get out and check, see how their food's looking.
How do you plan on doing those splits? Are you going to divide it into 2 hives, let them raise their own queen, or are you going to control what the new queen is?
I may have some, so I'm working with other, this is called the Northern Queen Initiative. It's a part of the SBGMI Guild. They're based
Oh,
out of
okay.
Michigan, but their members are all over the country. So I have been working with James talking about maybe how we could start a kind of model like that here in the Southeast. And so, one thing that is a goal for them is to be able to select and breed for their local queens, but it's the time to rear them that they're, because they're still in winter when
Oh,
we'll have
yeah.
already gotten done a round of grafts at least before that,
Right.
it's even warm enough up there. So we're talking about maybe he ships me some queens down here. I can graft off the F1s and send them back. So I may have some control over the genetics, but I'm also kind of working with other beekeepers in the area. And I think kind of a co-op model in agriculture in general, but in beekeeping specifically is really important. So all of us are working together to source genetics from different areas and maintain genetic diversity, but also get in some, different stuff that we might like. Caucasians are really good for propolis production, pole lines, and Just some different stuff that we're trying and, swapping around to each other. So
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of helps buffer us against losses and, maintains the diversity. So I think I will have it'll be interesting to see. So all this is going to kind of come together, I think, in the next month. But, that's beekeeping. I'm always flying by the seat of my pants, I feel like.
I talk a lot about this. So often I get in the middle of something before I'm really ready to be in the middle of it. I'm like, "Oh, I have these animals coming here today. I gotta go work on a pen." I've
Mhm.
gotta work a little bit better on that, but I do feel that. Would you characterize your bees as mainly Italians, what you have, or just some local?
Yeah, they're Italians sourced locally. So let me see, when I got them from my friend Ashby, who the beekeeper he got them from is Cameron Spath out of Honey Strong in South Carolina. So Ashby had grafted, we had done some hygienic testing with those. Ashby grafted off the best. And then that was what I and, many of his other new customers got. So pretty local stock. I've really liked these bees. They brood up really well, build up quick. Honey production was good, gentle, and I noticed,
Oh, yeah.
for a thing like hygienic behavior, um, even if you are selecting for it, you're still going to see variability among your hives. So I didn't test them for hygiene specifically, like I've done in the past, but just visually, that there were some in there that were maintaining mite or keeping mite loads down. I was seeing uncapping, so I was pretty happy with those bees.
Oh, very good. One thing you mentioned throughout this is working with other beekeepers. Would you say that's a big part of what you're doing?
100%. Yeah, I feel like, um, with the internet being, well, take it or leave it, there's good and bad to it, but
Right.
man, I have learned so much about beekeeping just from other areas, other geographic regions, the challenges that people face there, different scales, how they're scaling their business from feeding, queen rearing. So I've learned a lot from being able to connect with those folks and, just see what they're talking about. But,
Oh, yeah.
I've also maintained a lot of close relationships with all kinds of different beekeepers. So I feel like the more connected we are and the more, going to conferences and that networking, being able to talk about the industry or the problems and challenges that we're facing, I feel like only makes our industry stronger when we're more connected. So that's something I feel like is important to me is, I always kind of feel like I'm not quite in the research realm. I'm not quite a beekeeper. I am a beekeeper, but I'm never going to be a commercial beekeeper
Right.
because that's just simply not where my skill set lies of scaling to that level. But so I think I have kind of a unique, even though I don't quite fit in a specific category, but I'm coming to the industry, I think, with kind of a unique perspective and type of well-rounded experience that, I feel like my title, I'd never really quite know what it is in beekeeping, but I know what my role is and being able to use my network and connections and try to turn that around to hopefully make the most good for the industry. So we'll see what that leads to.
I think that's great. I'll be honest, the networking part, this is gonna be crazy to say with a podcast, but when I think about regenerative ag and I think about beekeeping, that's not my strong suit. Talking to people puts me out of my comfort zone. Just I'm more of an introvert. I know it's crazy when I do this, and my wife says, "Yeah, no one knows you are because you talk to everyone." But it's really
Oh,
outside my comfort zone. Going to
yeah.
It takes me a little bit of work to engage in those conversations, and I always know when I do it, the benefits are so wonderful. It's just sometimes getting there and doing it is a little
Yeah.
difficult for me, and I'm a homebody. I mean, I'll
Me
look at the
too.
calendar and I'll be like, "Oh, I really should go." This is so there's bee club that meets an hour away from me, and that Monday night, I'm always like, "Oh, I just wanna stay home." But
Mhm.
I know if I go, I really enjoy it. So
Yeah. Yeah, it can be hard to well, and it sometimes too, it feels like, uh, I know I want to be more involved in my local club this year, or at least trying to go to more meetings. But
Right.
it's, like you said, it's always at that time of night, or I feel like most of the time I wake up and I'm beekeeper. I'm talking to beekeepers on the phone. I'm writing about bees. I'm reading about bees. It's just sometimes just like, you know what? Can I watch a true crime documentary or something?
Yes.
I just need to not talk about bees right now.
I
But
like to
it's
my wife and I like to characterize it by the morning us is very different from the evening us. Because the morning us, we're talking about, "Oh, we should have this for supper. We'll do this." And then evening self is like, "Oh, I don't wanna cook. I don't
I'm
wanna go
not doing
anywhere."
any of that. Well, especially in the winter too, it makes it even harder.
Oh, it does, yes. In talking about those connections and what role the internet played in fostering some of those connections, were there some resources that you really found beneficial that people you would encourage people to use?
Yeah, I think for beekeeping specifically, Bee Source is a great. It's like beekeeping Facebook and then actual Facebook. I would say and that kind of happened twofold of that I through talking with beekeepers, and I just became more and more friends with more
Oh,
beekeepers. And so, just what they post, but also being involved in the groups too. So that has helped a lot.
are there some particular groups that are really beneficial?
I think for Facebook
Yeah,
being
for
a member,
Facebook.
yeah, being a member of your state organization's Facebook, because that'll give you the most, local and up to date information for you. Um, I enjoy some of the beginner beekeeping groups because I think there's a lot of stuff on there that, people are asking for advice and things. So I think it's interesting to read, you know, see that concept of ask 10 beekeepers one question, get 11 answers. But,
Right.
and a lot of that ends up boiling down to be about the same anyway. But it's interesting to me to read what people are suggesting for different problems, the problems that arise, because after 10 years of doing this, I'm not going to be seeing this with the same eyes as somebody. Of course, I can know what to recommend and things like that. But so it just helps me to be more mindful of when interacting with newer beekeepers. But I think being on the Queen Breeders Forum is really important. And then think of some larger scale. I wouldn't like recommend a commercial Facebook beekeeping group, but something that's sideliners are joining and they're talking about, I scaled up my feed rig to this. This has made this a lot
Oh, yeah.
easier. So I think that kind of gives a good mix of beekeeping from different perspectives.
Those are wonderful suggestions, and I always at first, uh, Facebook, the negatives of it and everything, but basically my feed on Facebook is all the groups I'm part of, and I find that really valuable that I didn't anticipate it being as valuable as it is.
Yeah, that's the only reason why I'm keeping Facebook. Like,
Right,
how am I
exactly.
gonna I'm gonna miss my updates on grandma's canning group? Come on, I just can't do
Right,
that. So
exactly. To get started with the Beyond the Buzz, let's talk a little bit about hygienic behavior. And first, just so we're all on the same page, when we talk about hygienic behavior, what are we talking about?
yeah, so this is a behavior that is performed mostly by middle-aged bees. And essentially it is the detection, uncapping, and removal of brood that is unhealthy or that would pose a threat in some way to her sisters if she emerged and spread, the virus's disease or mites that she had. Bees will, and depending on what is at the core of the issue, the brood is able to use pheromones to communicate to nurses that recruit them to the area and essentially give them more information once they uncap it, inspect the brood. And, a few things can happen from there. In the case of if it's a mite, they'll uncap and sometimes recap, or they can remove the brood too if it's too diseased. Sometimes they cannibalize. So even though that sounds kind of harsh for the baby bees. It's a way of the colony protecting itself. It's a part of the colony's immune system.
And with the hygienic behavior, you mentioned testing for it. How do you test for hygienic behavior in your bees?
Sure. Yeah, there's a few different ways to do it, and they all range in skill level, access, price, things like that. So, and I would say before performing any tests, you want to make sure that you're starting with good selected stock first. And I caution against that because, hygiene testing is, I know, is something that appeals to more of the bee nerds or people that always want to find more information out about their bees, but it is quite an investment upfront in the knowledge and skills that, to do it. And so you don't want to do all that and then not really get anything back
Oh,
results
yeah.
wise that, you can breed off that stock. So I would say source some good stock first of a reputable hygienic breeder. But then once you get to the testing phase, more commonly what's used or historically what's been used a lot is the freeze killed brood test. And so that can be done with using liquid nitrogen. You pour it onto a section of capped brood and leave them to work on that for 24 hours. And if they uncap 95% or more, then that's a hygienic colony. You can also, there's a modified version of that. You can cut out a section of brood, freeze that, pop it back in, and it's the same criteria. Something that, sorry, there'll be a couple of them. I'll make it brief though. But typically, what is done in Europe is the pin killed brood test. And it's a pin that you pierce through the center of capped brood cells and assess removal of that after 24 hours. And then for the mite focused hygienic test would be the Harbo test. And essentially, that is opening up lots of cells manually and pulling out brood to inspect for non-reproductive mites. So
Oh,
we're
okay.
looking for the colony's natural ability to preferentially remove reproductive mites as a way of suppressing mite reproduction. And then lastly, the test that I worked on, and this was some work done with Dr. Kara Wagner out of UNC Greensboro. Essentially, this is a pheromone test that we released just last year, about a year ago now. And this is taking those pheromones that I talked about and applying them to a section of capped brood and measuring their uncapping after 2 hours. And so
Oh, okay.
this test kind of sits in between. It more measures their ability to respond to stress brood rather than brood that is dead, like in the case of the freeze killed brood test, which that selects for a slightly different mechanism of hygiene compared to like the Harbo or or even UBO, which are thought to be different mechanisms there. So I told you that's my nerdy topic.
It's wonderful. With the different methods there, you mentioned just a while ago that the selection for bees that are removing those brood that's dead is gonna be different than stressed. If you are doing a pin poke in it, is that stressing the brood that gives off that same pheromone? Or is that gonna be more like the kill or the freeze test?
Yeah, great question. I would say, and there's been I think some work is in the mix to determine how different the pheromones are compared in a pin
Oh,
killed
yeah.
versus freeze killed brood. I would say it is closer to a freeze killed brood, but w- it has been shown that bees are a little bit more hygienic towards a pin killed brood test because it leaves that hole, which facilitates detection
Oh,
and
yeah.
uncapping and removal of that. But also, you'll see some hemolymph. I've done hundreds of the pin killed tests in my master's, and yeah, you would always see this puddle of hemolymph coming out. And so, and that happens if you hit a cell that's a little bit young. So you want
Oh, yeah.
white eyed brood. So, and how that compares, we know that the pheromone profile of the freeze killed brood test that there is one pheromone component of it that acts to attract workers. It's a highly volatile pheromone that attracts workers, and then more targeted pheromones that they can target the cell for hygiene then. So I would imagine that pin kill would be closer to that, but it's a test that is not as widely used because you can see some of that exaggerated hygiene that,
Oh,
is
yes.
it because they're actually that hygienic, or is it because, there's a big hole in it in the cell capping? So sorry. No, it's just it's good to just keep those in mind as you're testing.
We did a few years ago, we had a high school student at the school where I worked in FFA doing a program, and they wanted to do some testing. So we came out and did some pin tests or pin killed
Cool.
brood on a few hives so they could see it. And I'll have to admit, the results were better than I anticipated because I don't feel like I haven't purchased hygienic bees. I've purchased a few packages, I've caught a few swarms, not really worried about it too much. So that
Right.
could be a result of that heightened response due to the opening in the cap.
Yeah, and I think that too, and certainly there were, and all the ones I did in my master's, when I did all the hygiene tests for this paper that we were doing and kind of compared across them. But yeah, sometimes they would really attack it, and sometimes they wouldn't. So even though there are some colonies still that won't respond to it, even though it should elicit a higher response.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense. But yeah, that's interesting that you tested with it too.
So when you do these tests, are you seeing a wide range of responses to it?
Yeah, it depends. Yes, I do. I see everything from, the most hygienic to no score at all. It depends on the selection history. It depends on the time of year that you're testing that particular colony. And yeah, I think it can depend too on the test. So, you know, uh, a hive that is selected for uh, freeze killed brood, performance on the freeze killed brood test may score higher on a harbo just because there may be some overlap, but may not
Oh, yeah.
be qualify as a breeder for a harbo candidate as a breeder candidate for a harbo test, if that makes sense. So we're in general selecting them to be better sniffers, but the mechanisms for each behavior and each test are different. So even if you're selecting one colony for one test and they score well there, they may not necessarily respond uh, that way. So in the example of UBO, we found that um, you know colonies that had been selected for freeze killed brood in general scored higher on that test, but it's essentially selecting for the even the top performers of freeze killed brood, just
Oh,
because
okay.
it's not as powerful as the freeze killed brood scent. It's a little bit more subtle. So we wouldn't expect everybody to score great on that test because we haven't selected bees for that really, and it's a more subtle cue. So there are a lot of things that can kind of affect hygienic performance. One then being the uh, nutrition and food that's coming into the hive. So they more readily perform hygiene when there's a nectar flow going on. And that tends to be the time that people do their hygiene testing.
Yeah, that leads me, I'd made a note of the question you mentioned about the difference in time of year. Is that really just a factor of how much nectar is coming in?
Yeah, yeah. For UBO and for freeze killed, you may see a decrease in performance or performance on the test if you test during the dearth. It's the opposite for the Harpo test. That's you actually want to test during the dearth, which, for here, it's not really tied to the dearth. It's really tied more to mite population at that point. So the best
Oh,
time to
okay.
do a Harpo test would be, in August when mite population is at its highest and, gives you ample opportunity to look to see how they're dealing with the reproductive mites.
When you think about selection criteria for your breeders, are you giving them multiple tests, or have you settled on just one test to identify them?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think that I think that any hygiene selection should be the last step in your selection method. So you want to select for uh, some of these tests too you can use to okay, I like these colonies here, say like out of 50, maybe I've narrowed it down to 5 that, look good, they built up good, good temperament, propolis production, and that tends to vary based on producer what it is that they look for prior to hygiene selection. But I could see the benefit. It depends on how much time you have and I guess how serious you are uh, about your breeding stock and really what the goals of your operation are. So if you're a queen breeder, maybe you're actually selling instrumentally inseminated breeder queens or, you know, F1s and you want to that, this queen is priced at this price point because of all the selection, then you may want to do two hygiene tests, either, the freeze killed brood, and I would do Harbo and
Oh, yeah.
for any breeder that I'm selecting. But you could do 2. You could even do a grooming test in there too if you wanted to. But, if you're just looking for if you're mainly a uh, beekeeper that is focused on production, then I think sourcing the genetics, if you want to make queens for yourself, I would pick one test, probably the Harbo test, because I think mites are um, I think that's the biggest problem that we're dealing with. But you don't necessarily have to go overboard with it to reap the benefits of using mite and disease resistant stock.
Oh, yeah. For a backyard beekeeper or someone with just a few hives, they get in a queen that has hygienic behavior and they raise a few queens out of her. How many generations before they need to go buy another hygienic queen? Is
Yeah,
it
great
something
point.
they should, well, rather than me rambling on, I'll let you answer.
No, no, I know exactly, yeah, where you're going with that, and I'm not sure uh, that I've seen a very good answer for that. I wouldn't recommend buying 2 years in a row from the same source or and
Oh,
and
yes.
that you're only purchasing from that source. So, if you buy from that person again and, maybe bring in some other sources as well. But I think it's that repeated, it just in my visual experience, I'm sure that there's a study that's been done on this, in our research yards. I has started, I, there were times where I saw the white eye drone
Yes.
issue and that's kind of and I could be wrong about this, but I think it's a indication of some inbreeding there, and that's when I
Oh,
started to see
okay.
that, I was like, "Maybe we shouldn't keep buying from, this one package source," which we did. We bought from the same bee supply store, and he always brought them in from Georgia. So, for a small scale beekeeper, just a couple hives in the backyard, maybe if they are purchasing every year, and if so, maybe there are some other issues to address there. Even, we all have, win or
Right.
losses, but you certainly hear of people sometimes, who are yearly customers.
Oh, yeah.
So addressing maybe some root issues there with that, but maybe every 2 to 3 years, could add in some other sources and just to get around the inbreeding issue.
Oh, yeah. Before we move to the famous 4 questions, is there anything else you'd like to add about hygienic behavior?
No, I thought that was exciting. I love when I get the chance to talk about it and frame it in a way that hopefully people can use because it is a pretty dense subject,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
when you could break it down into hygienic behavior. And so if we can, a lot of these bigger concepts, if and the point of it is of people like me, I guess, learning about them is to eventually translate it in ways that, we can practically use. So I hope that some of it was helpful at least.
Yes, it was very good. It is time for our famous 4 questions. And Phoebe, I'm not sure I even mentioned this before the episode, so
That's okay.
I it was on my list, but I didn't get to it. But that's okay. It's same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question, what is your favorite beekeeping related book or resource?
Mm. Let's see. I think the Beekeepers Bible is good.
Oh, yes.
I love how that really mixed in a lot of historical, cultural, there's a lot of good recipes in there and some practical beekeeping stuff there too. So I love the aesthetics of it too. I think it's a good, well-rounded, something that, makes interesting and approachable enough that you're ready to grab the next book then.
Very good. Yeah. Our second question, what's your favorite tool to use on your beekeeping?
As in like my hive tool, like a hive
I
tool type
b
or just what I grab
It's
for.
just when I think about tool, I don't mean it can be your physical hive tool, but just in general, and maybe that's a rewording I need to use. On the Grazing Grass podcast, I say favorite tool for your farm, and we get all kinds of answers. I notice with the beekeeping, we wanna go to the hive tool, so I may have to work on the
I see what
wording on
yeah.
that one. It's
Immediately my head did that.
yeah, yeah.
I
So maybe your favorite what could
my
we do?
implement
Your
no,
favorite
I know what my
practice
answer would
or
be now.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So mine would be this it's super obnoxious, this big blue feed barrel that I put on the back of my truck, and it's completely changed feeding for me, but yeah, it has a pump to it
Oh,
and,
yes.
big hose but man, mixing up gone are the days of mixing up syrup in 5-gallon buckets and
Oh,
lugging them
yes.
around and, heaving them up to pour it in. So I would say as silly and people recognize me now around town with my big blue barrel on the back. But yeah, that's been my biggest tool that I can't live without now.
Oh, very good. Do you mix it up in the blue barrel?
So I go to my friend Ashby and he gets because he probably runs 400 to 500 hives. So he goes and gets syrup from another commercial guy
Oh,
and then,
so you're
he'll
getting the
just fill up
syrup,
my
so you're
barrel.
oh, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, much easier.
that's
That's
helped
really
me
good.
tremendously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
Mm, I would say there's so many things. I would say just being open and open to the process of learning and failing and staying
Oh, yeah.
dedicated to the education and staying dedicated to the education and being humble for the lesson, if that makes sense. Because I still, like I talked about my swarm issue last year. Uh, you're never going to stop making mistakes. I know you know this too, being
Yeah.
an experienced beekeeper yourself, but the bees are always teaching me things and my duty to them is to continue to look for better ways to do things and, not be hard on myself when I make a mistake, but own up to it and, be better for next time. So, I think beekeeping is a process of something to learn and kind of that lifelong learning thing. So
Yeah,
just being
just
open to it.
just whenever you start to think you know what you're doing, the bees will correct you.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I
Many
love that,
times.
being open to the process and to the failures, because there will be failures in whatever you're doing. There's gonna be hurdles, there's gonna be speed bumps. There's gonna be
Yeah.
times
I
you're sitting back and reevaluating what you're doing.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm beekeeping has enabled me to take and evaluate better risks in my other life, my whole life too
Oh,
of
yeah.
starting a business and, oh, I failed as a beekeeper before. I can fail at this too, but, so it's
Right.
helped me in a lot of other ways too.
Very good. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
Oh, I don't wanna do that. I guess, well, Instagram's kinda maybe Facebook, that's a good one. Yeah, or my Instagram is but that's a lot of metal, so, that's a whole other personality. So if you like slamming brutal death metal, you can find me there, I guess.
Very good. Well, Phoebe, thank you for coming on and sharing today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been great.